Welcome to the Infinite Surface podcast, where today we're asking, what is talent? Well, if you ask Nikolaides, he would say that talent is something that develops or appears as you work. But is that really what talent means? That all that's required is the necessary effort? Isn't talent supposed to be something innate, something you're just born with? Can you really work your way into being talented? In my last video about the natural way to draw, I briefly compared Nikolaides' ideas to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours concept. On the surface, the connection felt obvious to me. Something to do with dismissing talent and placing work ethic as the best predictor of success in the arts. But the amount of comments that I got reminded me that there's a lot more to unpack in the relationship between what Nikolaides and Gladwell are discussing. In Outliers, Gladwell wants to reframe success because he says there's something profoundly wrong with the way that we make sense of it. I think the thing that Gladwell thinks is wrong is how we think about and use the idea of talent or the idea of genius. And I agree. These words have become loose and almost meaningless. They get thrown around when we want to describe someone with potential or someone who is succeeding or someone who is already great. Now, Gladwell didn't deny the existence of talent. He understood what we all do, that there are certain advantages that people can have, physical or intellectual or otherwise. But he wanted to point out that plenty of other factors are as relevant or maybe more relevant to what produces success. His book gives example after example of success stories that were shaped by the circumstances that allow whatever talent a person has to be developed. That's what the book focuses on, how the development is allowed to happen. The book isn't really about work ethic as much as it is about what combination of circumstances allow that person's talent and work ethic to be put to good use. The 10,000 hours idea comes in to remind us of just what an extraordinary amount of time successful people have dedicated to their craft, and just how unlikely it is that any person, even sometimes the most talented among us, have the opportunity to really try to turn that talent into success at the highest levels. So let's back up a little bit and start with the idea of talent, because that's what Gladwell is really responding to. I have to say, I've never liked the word talent. It never resonated with me, and I almost never see the need to use it. Interested, enthusiastic, patient, persistent, dedicated, all those words seem useful to me to describe someone who is doing well. But talented? I never call my students talented, not because I don't think that they're good or great or whatever, but because while it's flattering, it just takes away from the struggle that they invariably go through while developing. And I think that's exactly what the 10,000 hours idea, an essay by Anders Ericson that inspired it, was trying to reframe. That maybe what matters more than talent is time, mentorship, effort, opportunity, and structure. I also think that misunderstandings about what constitutes talent unfairly affect those who get to pursue what in life, and to what degree. In 2016, a study done by researchers from the University of Edinburgh published a paper called Panic: Social Class, Taste, and Inequalities in the Creative Industries, and it shows a significant mismatch in the belief in meritocracy and the reality of who is actually represented or having success in the art world. So I like Gladwell's idea that if talent means anything, maybe it's just a vague umbrella term, a kind of shorthand for all the factors that contribute to success in the creative world, including maybe, according to that study, having money, which gives you time and the ability to focus and access to coaches and programs and so on and so on. And please remember that this isn't limited to creative work. I say creative work intentionally because success in fields like art, music, or design, talent can feel more mysterious than, say, how the talent of being tall obviously helps a basketball player. So the study of success becomes the study of talent, and the study of talent becomes just our best guess at which combination of traits and circumstances lead to greatness. That question, what causes greatness? Well, Gladwell addressed it very differently than Anders Ericson does in his essay that inspired Gladwell's book. So much so that Ericson has been very publicly disappointed in Gladwell's interpretations and extrapolations. But we'll get into that later. First, let's start by taking a look at Ericson's essay, which starts off with some academic history on the topic when he cites Francis Galton. Galton was one of the first academics to publish on the topic in his paper Hereditary Genius, an inquiry into its laws and consequences in 1869. And given its age, it might be surprising how familiar his conclusions sound. Galton's conclusions basically sound like a breakdown of the Michael Jordan story. Talent and the success that comes from it are the result of a rare mix of inherited ability and intense work ethic. Galton called these innate aptitudes, combined with qualities of intellect and disposition. But he added two more interesting elements, which I agree are vital: zeal and the capacity for extremely laborious work. Greatness, he says, does not come from capacity without zeal or zeal without capacity. I think that's spot on. It's a powerful idea, but it's also a little bit obvious and maybe not that helpful overall. Yes, traits interact, but Galton doesn't explore how they interact. And despite emphasizing effort, he doesn't discuss what kinds of effort are best to help develop innate talent, or develop talent if you have none to start with. In the end, he circles back to heredity. Success in his framework is still rooted in biology. But genetic advantage doesn't do a lot to describe the difference between good and great, great and greatest, between successful and most successful. This is where work ethic gets kind of smuggled in, and where later Ericson will notice that the most successful people have put something like 10,000 hours into their craft in a very particular way. And that's really important to Ericson's idea, the very particular way. And before the age of 20, also important. So, is success really just the result of a perfect storm of traits that Galton is suggesting, mixed with work ethic and a particular practice that Ericson is observing? It seems to me like there are many, many, many people who have had that perfect storm going, but never reach Michael Jordan levels of success. So is Galton and Ericson right? Is success predictable, or is there something more? And this is the problem with how we use the word talent. It's a slippery term. Every NBA player, for instance, was probably the best in their school, the best in their town, maybe even their entire region. In high school, they were likely the most dominant athlete for hundreds of miles. Clearly talented. But once they make it to the NBA, some of these same players end up being role players or labeled busts. How can that be? They didn't lose their talent. They used it to get there. So is talent only valid if it leads to winning, or is it something that only exists in the right circumstances? Brian Scalabrine, often jokingly referred to as one of the worst players in NBA history, took this misconception head-on in his series, The Scallenge. He realized that many fans confused the fact that he was a role player in the NBA with a lack of talent, to the point that average people genuinely believed that they could beat him one-on-one. So he invited challengers, high school stars, college players, weekend warriors, and he dominated them. In one particularly funny instance, beating 3 at once, and the score, 11-0. His now famous line, "I'm way closer to LeBron than you are to me," it's a perfect reminder of how distorted our idea of talent can become. Scalabrine is incredibly talented. He made it to the league, and he stayed there for 11 seasons. But in the NBA, that talent is placed in a context where it doesn't always look like it. In this way, talent becomes kind of a moving target, used to describe different things in different contexts, and they all get lumped up together under the same vague label. And this vagueness matters because however we define and confuse talent, a person's current level right now, it's what actually matters for training, coaching, teaching, for how we build and design curriculums or protocols for schools, training camps, teams, leagues, etc. And maybe, most importantly, who we allow to have access to those resources. Sometimes whether a child is gauged to be talented or not can determine what path they get to take. And the rubric for that judgment is often as shaky as the idea of talent itself. So back to Nikolaides. Nikolaides doesn't seem interested in knowing where you are or where you're going. He just seems to know that his drawing exercises and his training schedule will help. He says right in the book, right in the beginning, I do not care who you are, what you can do, or where you have studied, or if you have studied at all. I'm only concerned with showing you some things which I believe will help you draw. And to his credit, his book does seem to address what Gladwell's book doesn't. The question of if you have the time, energy, support to try to develop your talent, what exactly should you be doing? While Gladwell doesn't go anywhere near giving advice, Ericson's essay, which we'll get into later, does. And the difference between what Ericson sees and what Nikolaides establishes in his schedule looks a lot like a fundamental debate in education that's ongoing, the debate over variation versus block training. The main difference between block and variation training is complexity. Block training simplifies tasks by isolating skills for repetitive practice in controlled settings. Variation training introduces more variables, prioritizing adaptability, decision-making, and flexible responses in unpredictable conditions. Ericson's observations certainly point towards the effectiveness of block training, and at first that's what Nikolaides and his famously intense schedule seem to be saying as well, that block training is important. The natural way to draw comes with a clear guideline. Follow the structure, put in the work, and you'll be bound to win out. And honestly, I get this approach that both Ericson and Nikolaides take. It makes sense for a teacher and a researcher to sidestep the talent conversation altogether. If someone wants to be an artist, in my opinion, the only real requirement is just make some art and let's see how it goes. The art world is full of variables, too unpredictable for anyone, even an experienced teacher, to accurately forecast success based on some checklist of traits or talents. And Nikolaides seems to agree. He says, I never concerned myself with how much talent my students have. I couldn't say to anyone in the beginning, you have no talent. Talent is something that develops or appears as you work. So Nikolaides is all about effort, and he's not vague about it. He says, there is no such thing as getting more than you put into anything. You expect the man guiding you through the mountains to save your energy and tell you the best way, but you can't get any farther in that mountain than you can and will walk. My one idea, says Nikolaides, is to direct you to make the right sort of effort, for if you do, you are bound to win out. But here's where things get tricky. When he talks about effort, Nikolaides gets kind of poetic. His tone is inspiring, but there's a lot of pressure on you baked into that. Work hard, follow instructions, and you'll succeed. And if you don't, well, maybe you didn't try hard enough, or maybe you're not really walking up the mountain the way that he told you to. It starts to feel a little gaslighty. This starts to make Nikolaides' method feel somewhat unfalsifiable. In psychology, this is called an immunization strategy, a framework where any failure can be attributed to external variables rather than to the flaws in the method itself. So while it's fair to say that Nikolaides' approach isn't scientific, it also doesn't claim to be. His program doesn't isolate individual skills to refine measurable outcomes. Instead, it blends repetition with variability and discipline with play. Exercises like blind contour, memory drawing, and gesture work aren't designed to produce polished drawings. They're meant to cultivate responsiveness, perception, and attention. By sidestepping results, perhaps Nikolaides is relieving the student of the psychological pressure to perform, easing some of the anxiety that comes with expectations. But he's also refusing to define any concrete outcomes aside from the vague goal of seeing like an artist. What he's really offering is a process, one that asks you to return to the act of looking again and again from slightly different angles each time. And that's powerful, and it's something I believe in too, but make no mistake, it brings its own kind of anxiety with it. And then there's this line. Nature is lavish with talent, just as it is with acorns, but not all acorns become oaks. Honestly, that feels like a bit of backpedaling, like he's pulling the escape hatch. It's as if he's saying, follow my program and it'll work, but if it doesn't, maybe you were just never the right kind of acorn to begin with. I mean, look, I love Nikolaides. I love his book, but there's a lot to unpack here. At first glance, his ideas feel grounded and accessible, but the more you read, the more contradictions start to surface. If some acorns are just never going to become oaks, then we're back to saying that talent is innate, right? So which is it, Nikolaides? Is talent real or not? I get what he's trying to say. Nurture the seed, give it time, and see what grows. I like the spirit of that, but there's something evasive in it. He's asking you to trust the process, and if it works, then you become the artist, and he becomes the wise teacher who guided you. But if it doesn't work, if it works for someone else but not for you, what does that mean? Did you not try hard enough? Or were you just the wrong kind of acorn to begin with? I don't know what he would say to that, but I do know this. What Nikolaides is brushing up against here is part of a much bigger, still unresolved conversation, one that cuts across education, sports, and skills development. And that brings us back to Gladwell and Ericson. A lot of people misinterpret their work, especially after Outliers. People started thinking that it was all about time, all about hitting some arbitrary mark of 10,000 hours. So in the next episode, we'll go deeper into exactly that. We'll look at what Anders Ericsson actually said in his research, how it differs from Gladwell's popular reframing, and what it means for how we practice and how we teach. Because, as it turns out, not all practice is created equal. Remember that Nikolaides doesn't want you making just any kind of effort. He wants you making the right kind of effort. So check out part 2 for a conversation about the difference between block training and variability training, and how each method affects the way that we learn, and how all of that relates to Nikolaides and the natural way to draw. Thanks for watching the Infinite Surface podcast. I hope you liked the video, and I'd love to do more of this kind of in-depth conversation about art. It's the first time I'm tackling this kind of subject, so let me know what you think. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you did like it, then please like it and subscribe, and hit the bell if you want to be notified about upcoming videos like part 2 of this series. So see you then.